The name Phil Knight may not be exactly familiar to everybody, but the sporting goods brand that he created almost certainly is. Lee Cowan has our Sunday profile.
Not far from Portland, Oregon, sprawling across some 350 manicured acres, you'll find this. A cathedral to sports, and a castle, in a way, to capitalism. This is the home of the swoosh, the world headquarters of Nike. It's the largest athletic shoe and apparel company on the planet, with sales topping $30 billion last year alone. It took to the starting line over 50 years ago, the brainchild of a young track athlete named Phil "Buck" Knight. He's now 78 and one of the richest men in the world.
There are times when the sun goes down and I look out at the buildings and I get pretty choked up.
An empire is sort of a funny word, but it kind of is.
Well, we don't use that word about ourselves, but it's gotten pretty big.
He's a curious character, controversial, unpredictable, and fiercely competitive, possessing a just-do-it style of business that sometimes rubbed people the wrong way.
It seems like you almost bristle at the suggestion that you're a businessman.
No, not at all. I'm proud of that. We do business the way we do business.
When he announced he was stepping down as Nike's chairman last year, Knight decided to reveal what he calls his crazy idea of a business plan in a memoir called Shoe Dog, published by Scribner, a division of CBS's Simon & Schuster.
It was a crazy idea to the outside world, but it never really was to me. That it was always a big hope.
That hope first flickered here at storied Hayward Field at the University of Oregon, where Knight was a mid-distance runner.
Did you like the roar of the crowd?
Very much. I didn't get that many, but...
He wasn't the fastest, but he just might have been the smartest.
I came here as a 17-year-old, just very uncertain of everything, and met Bill Bowerman, and I've often said, if there's no Bill Bowerman, there's no me.
Bill Bowerman was Knight's coach. He was obsessed with tearing apart track shoes and reassembling them, creating sort of a Frankenshoe of his very own.
What were they like?
Well, they were just, he would make them out of goat skin, and so they would just have almost no form in the upper, and then he'd get a spike plate taken off another shoe and then glue it on. They were pretty ugly, but they were light, and I was one of his guinea pigs, and that, kind of planted a seed.
That seed took root while getting his MBA at Stanford. Knight wrote a paper outlining a strategy of manufacturing running shoes in Japan, where the labor was cheaper.
Well, ever since I wrote it, it was sort of ticking away in there. It just kept kind of growing.
After graduating, Knight put his paper into action, convincing a Japanese company to let him distribute their brand of running shoe, called Tigers, here in the U.S. He began selling them out of the trunk of his car. His initial investment, $1,000, that he split 50-50 with his new partner and former coach, Bill Bowerman.
People say, oh, you hear what Knight's doing to the Stanford MBA? He's peddling Japanese track shoes. That was a pretty big joke at the time. But I wanted it, so I said, I gotta try it. I gotta try it.
By 1971, their little shoe company had sales of $1.3 million and a new innovation, thanks to Bowerman's unlikely experiment with his wife's waffle iron.
He put urethane in there. He says, maybe that's the pattern. That's a different pattern that breaks up that should give you more traction and more cushioning.
The result was the Waffle Trainer, a new kind of sole that Knight wanted to manufacture under his own brand.
What was the name you wanted?
No, Dimension 6.
Dimension 6, which no one...
It'd be a hard time fitting on a heel tab, wouldn't it?
Why Dimension 6?
Well, there was a fifth dimension, right? So we wanted to be an extra dimension.
But no one bought that idea.
Nobody liked it.
Mercifully, an employee proposed another name, Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. But Knight wasn't crazy about it, nor did he like the logo. The wing, as it was called then, a design he actually paid a college student just $35 to draw, was supposed to symbolize the sound of speed. But Knight thought it just looked like a big fat check mark.
Nothing ever stands out and says, boy, that's it. There's not a eureka moment that, for me, that in almost all these things, I just say, okay, that's the best we can do, let's go.
Marketing was never Knight's thing. In fact, he hated advertising. But he soon realized that well-known athletes wearing his shoes could speak and sell volumes. Romanian tennis pro Ilie Nastase was the first big name signed. John McEnroe would soon follow. And then came a 21-year-old basketball phenom from the University of North Carolina.
Shot, Jordan, Michael Jordan.
When you first signed Michael Jordan, people thought you were nuts, right?
Well, Fortune magazine ran a story about how Nike has lost its way by paying so much money for this basketball player.
This you can buy. You cannot do this. Can.
How much did you pay?
The first year was like $250,000 a year.
And he hadn't played a single game in the NBA at that point.
No, but he'd been player of the year in the NCAA.
The Air Jordan became so popular, people were willing to kill for them. And they did. In the early 90s, a string of shootings and stabbings over the shoes made headlines.
That was just a shock. The reaction is, this is insane, and it's a shock.
In terms of just the desirability, it had reached sort of this cultural, it was more than just a shoe.
Yeah, that's true.
Nike rarely shied away from controversy. Sometimes, in fact, they courted it, signing athletes whose early promise was sometimes later tarnished.
There are those who've been critical, for example, of Dennis Rodman, and people whose reputation on the court is phenomenal, off the court is a little different. Do you ever worry about those two sides?
We like a little wackiness, just don't want too much.
Athletes going rogue hasn't been his only trouble. His use of cheap overseas labor, while economical, proved disastrous in the field of public relations. In the 90s, Nike was accused of fostering sweatshop labor. Human rights organizations even called for boycotts of Nike products. While Knight resisted the charges at first, he now insists conditions and wages have been improved.
Initially, your reaction to it, you said, was making things worse. You were a little defensive about it.
It was, yeah. We tried to find the best factories we could to work with. And, good shoes come out of good factories. The fact that they could be better was what we should have concentrated on, what we ultimately did concentrate on.
Boy, it's a beautiful campus, though, isn't it?
It's very pretty.
Knight has softened in his later years.
Well, this part is all still the same.
His personal fortune is now estimated to be around $25 billion. Money, he says, was never the reason he started selling shoes, but now that he has it, he intends to use it.
By the time, the lives of my children and their kids run out, I will have given most of it to charity.
Together with Penny, his wife of 48 years, they've already donated well over $1 billion to various causes. They pledged $500 million for cancer research at the Oregon Health and Science University. At Stanford, where he drew up that blueprint for Nike, they've given more than $500 million and counting.
I'm Phil Knight.
I'm Matt Hidalgo.
Good to see you.
But it's here, at the University of Oregon, where Knight's mark is most obvious. From the law school, named after his father, to the gleaming new basketball arena, named after his son, Matthew, who died tragically in a diving accident.
I can get pretty emotional about this place, too. After all, I was born here.
The University of Oregon has given Nike something back, too. A high-profile platform to launch uniforms, helmets, and, of course, shoes. Phil Knight wanted to make history as an athlete himself. But instead, he ran a different race, one that has put that big fat check mark on the face.
Here comes Michael Jordan.
Or at least the feet of athletics forever.
Can you imagine yourself doing anything else?
No, I'm blessed. I couldn't imagine a better life.